finally, a source of raw, real, and honest information on healthcare issues that matter most. Welcome to BS Free MD. From the latest medical information to how to stay sane as a doctor or a patient, no subject is taboo, no BS is allowed. Now, let's welcome your hosts, Doctors May and Tim Hindmarsh.
Well, we have an interesting episode this week, that's for sure. We have Ryan Heath back again, our young attorney friend who is filled with passion, been taking on several different California school districts with regards to mask and vaccine mandates. He has an extensive update for us on what's going on there. They have a suit filed, and he's going to go into detail on some of the absolutely barbarian things that are going on in the name of science to young children, which is hard for us to even comprehend. So this one is really good. So buckle up, kids.
Hey, everybody. We are back this week. This is third time's a charm, and I think our guest today, Ryan Heath, wins for the most appearances on our podcast. So welcome back, Ryan. So good to have you back and on the show.
Thank
again.
you. It's always an honor to be here. One of my favorite podcasts to come on.
And you're one of our favorite people too, doing really cool work.
Thank you.
So for people that haven't listened to the other two episodes with you, give everybody a little brief bio about yourself and what kind of work you've been doing. Bring us up to speed.
Yeah, so I am an attorney licensed in the state of Arizona, and I run a nonprofit organization called the Gavel Project. And I started that with my wife and some other folks about a year ago now, in October of 2021. I quit my job at a firm after hearing that Gavin Newsom was going to be mandating vaccinations as a contingent of children getting an education and actually getting a high school diploma, which is a basic ticket to participate in society. And to me, that was just absolutely disgusting. I couldn't take it anymore. And so I did what I felt was necessary, and I started an organization to start pushing back on these issues, specifically vaccine mandates, COVID-19 mandates, which were, in my view, the clearest indication I had seen in my lifetime of just abject tyranny. And it's a medical apartheid state that we're dealing with here. And so as someone who understands how important liberty is, just for I don't know why it's so important to me, but I just naturally am someone who always seemed to say F you when someone told me to do something that I didn't want to do. That's just sort of my tendency. I grew up.
I know kids. I was gonna say I remember kids like you in school, and I was the opposite. I'm like, I'm just got in line and did what I was told. Give me the evil eye, and I'm like, that's not fair. How do kids like that do that?
You were a very good Canadian. Okay, I'll just do what I'm told.
Anyway,
can I have some poutine, please?
Now, people like Ryan are my hero now because we need people like you. But anyway, you were like F you to the establishment.
I was a bad kid, to be frank with you. Like I was one of those kids that my parents actually had to send me away. Excuse me for just a second. My parents had to send me away when I was 17. I was so outspoken and so basically just non-obedient as a 17-year-old young man that I was out of control. My parents had to actually, I was blessed enough as a young man. I've talked about this elsewhere. My family is the Heath candy bar family. It was one of my grandfathers invented the Heath candy bar, great-great-grandfather. I don't know how far back. I don't recall exactly. I'll talk to my grandma and find out. But my grandfather sold the company before I was born and moved the family out to Phoenix. And, for me, I had my education paid for. That was one of the things as a young man. I could have gone to any school I wanted to. My siblings went to, dream schools in the South and enjoyed their time. in college, but I was a dumb 17-year-old and decided to, I was a really dedicated person. I'm very passionate about my work. And I used to have the same passion for football when I was growing up. I actually played year-round football as a young man for many years, and my body today is absolutely broken because of it. It was the stupidest thing anyone could ever do, is play football year-round while they're developing and going through puberty. I blew my left knee out 4 times. Before I was 17, I had 2 surgeries. And so I ended up actually having an issue with the pain pills. And being someone who was just openly defiant like this and just naturally predisposed to disagree. Like my parents probably tried reeling me in. They got a breathalyzer, and I tried, setting records on it when I came home from parties. Like that's how defiant I was. I was the outcome here is worth the trouble. Like I'm just going to do what I want to do. And so I had to go live in the woods for 2 months. And then I had to go to boarding school for 10 months. And I had an opportunity to be around a whole bunch of people that today in our living reality are preyed upon openly by predators in our society that are calling themselves physicians. Individuals that are giving hormones to children and sterilizing them when we know scientifically that early onset gender dysphoria has between a 60 to 90% desistance rate. So why are we giving hormones to children who are just naturally predisposed to end up being gay if we let them just run the course naturally and wait and see? Or perhaps do nothing and just say, well, perhaps this is something that you're growing into. Maybe a child can't communicate what it means to feel feminine. And that's what the child is feeling. And perhaps that child's not actually a girl. They just can't communicate what they're feeling because they're 7.
As we say, at least I can say, no girl likes being a girl in junior high. I don't know. I think from like 11 to 18, it's just like, this is hell. I hate this. My body's revolting. I don't want to. I mean, that's normal. It should be. Yes. It should be not celebrated, but just like. It's normal to hate your body and to go through this. It gets better. I mean, we're having this discussion because we've done a podcast on this, and this is dear to my heart too. But, and man, I had my own body dysmorphic disorder. I mean, I was anorexic and bulimic because I hated my body. And, we talk about how if people bought into that, I mean, gosh, what? You're going to give me a gastric bypass because I don't like my body? Are you going to give me diet pills? It's just nuts. But I remember when this might probably TMI for you two guys on this show, but I remember being 12 or having my first period. You got girls, so get ready for this. But I remember looking at my mom and just crying in the corner, doubled over in pain with cramps. And I'm like, I hate this. This sucks. And she's like, well, suck it up, buttercup. This is being a woman. And I'm like, I hate being a woman. I don't want to be a woman. I mean, and I can literally remember all of that. And plus all that's going on now for girls and the social media and it's just even compounded. So I want physicians, I want parents, I want people to embrace kids, love them and go, it's normal to feel you don't belong in this body and that you want to reject it. It doesn't mean that's the truth. It's just, it's feelings. It's not truth. You don't have to change it. This too will pass. I mean, gosh.
Yeah, but there's a meta narrative here that I think needs to be addressed, and it overarches COVID. It overarches what Ryan's doing with the countering the mandates, which is if you feel anything unpleasant, someone else can take care of your shit for you. And conveniently, that someone is a multinational corporation with backing by the federal government. That's really what it comes down to, is that you shouldn't be sad. You shouldn't be upset. You shouldn't hate your body. You shouldn't, Lizzo is a fitness expert now, for the love of God.
Lizzo is a fat piece of crap. Allow me to say that just bluntly.
Right.
She needs to take accountability for her own health, because she's someone who children look up to. And she has a responsibility to those children to be healthy in a way that children should aspire to, because being obese and being fat like that is clearly unhealthy, and it shouldn't be stigmatizing for anyone to say this in society, that these are facts. The vast majority of individuals that ended up hospitalized for COVID-19 were obese, 75% at one point. That this is absurd that we are ignoring truth in reality in such a widespread way. I'm sorry for cutting you off, Dr. Heinrich.
No.
But again, that's the meta narrative. Like you shouldn't be sad. Life shouldn't be hard. Like, I mean, this is the culmination of the John Wayne prophecy, which is life is hard, but it's even harder if you're stupid.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? It's even harder if you're stupid and complacent. And and so speaking of truth, beautiful segue into this giant steaming pile of crap that is emerging from the bowels of California, which is the new law. I forget what it is, 2098 or 2038 or whatever it is, where they're going to censure doctors, potentially take their licenses away only for COVID misinformation, not for just misinformation, because let's be honest, there's misinformation everywhere. But the thing I find very fascinating about that is in the body of that, it says the definition of either disinformation or misinformation, they have a definition for each, is not going along with the medical consensus or standard of care. Okay? So it's exactly what you say about truth. Science is not consensus. Science is truth. Einstein was essentially ostracized when he first came up with relativity back 100 years ago, because it was so crazy and we didn't have the math to figure it out yet. And we didn't have the way to reproduce. I mean, it took, 60, 70 years for them to use particle accelerators or whatever it was and big enough telescopes to actually prove science experimentally that relativity really existed. And yet, Galileo, you could go down the line, all of these people. Science is not consensus. It's exactly the opposite of that. It's vigorous debate.
It's what happens on the exterior, in the zone of proximate development in society is where science happens. It's on the fringes. Those that are challenging the narrative are engaged in science. Those that are challenging the orthodoxy of what is believed by the complex that may be at the time are engaged in science. That's where it happens, of course.
Yeah, it just blows my mind. So now, it's interesting because who knows how many doctors will really be affected? My guess is a handful, as far as actual potential board, discrimination or whatever word you want, being called before the Board of Medical Examiners, have your license censured or taken away. But that's not why you do it. You don't do it as the example of, this wacko guy or whatever. You get a couple wackos so that society goes, yeah, this is good because we're getting rid of wackos. And then you get a couple people that are actually potentially good but aren't towing the narrative. And then what ends up happening is everybody else gets in line. That's why you pass this. It's because it's a fear tactic. And I've said this throughout the entire pandemic. The most powerful drug in the world is not opium. It's not meth. It's not cocaine. It is fear. And these guys are the fear pornographers. They make Larry Flint look like a, choir boy. And it's the fear porn that is the cudgel that's being used. And so what's the antidote to fear? It's courage. And we've been trying on the podcast to emphasize courage wherever we can. And I mean, you are an absolute example of that.
Thank you. Yeah. I mean, I guess I can loop it all in back to the story. I basically, through this process of starting the Gavel Project, the idea was to start really an organization dedicated to educating the public on their civil rights and funding lawsuits that were run intentionally and set up in such a way as to succeed based on constitutional merits. And so what I did starting in January and in February and March, basically in that time frame, I went around the state of California and I actually turned into a civil rights advocate, and I started educating children on what their rights were when it came to mandates, COVID-19 mandates in their schools. And I met with parents, I met with kids, and I educated them on the law, basically explaining what sort of circumstances they could be removed from school for, and explaining why they actually had a constitutional right based on the First Amendment to express themselves, to disagree with a compelled orthodoxy on a matter of personal concern, a bodily autonomy, which is a protected right under the Constitution. You have a right to disagree with compelled orthodoxy on matters of deep concern when it comes to politics, when it comes to religion, when it comes to matters that are profound to the individual. The whole point of the First Amendment is to prevent the government from being able to force you to basically play pretend. When there's no justification, scientific justification for a government mandate, that mandate is actually unconstitutional. It infringes upon liberties, especially when they're expressly reserved, like the First Amendment, which is to freedom of expression. And the fact is, removing a mask from one's face is what's called expressive conduct. It sends a clear message. I mean, everyone today recognizes the term COVID theater. It's a common term that's used in society, and it means basically that you are engaged in action to show that you agree with the narrative. You're wearing a cloth mask, for example, the very type of surgical mask that often contains a warning on the box saying it doesn't protect the user from COVID. This is a common thing. We're talking about individuals who are openly displaying by their actions that they are prescribing to certain ideals or to certain teams. And so by removing a mask, you are engaged in the same conduct. Any reasonable person watching the action would understand it to be inherently communicative. That's because you're just disagreeing in protest. And so that's the only way you really can, in fact, protest a mask mandate, is by removing your mask. How else are you supposed to protest that? Are you supposed to wear a mask that says, I disagree? No, you take the mask off and you show the government that you're not some sort of sheep. And so that's what these kids were doing. And I actually helped them do this. And we have lawsuits now, a number of them across the state. We actually filed our first one last week against Coronado Unified School District. And we're basically representing pro bono this girl and her mother, who was put outside in the cold for 26 days between January 31st and March 11th of this year. She went to school and she didn't want to wear a mask. And so the school's policy in response to this was their local policy adopted by the Board of Trustees and by the administrators of Coronado Unified School District, was to exclude her. And I quote that's their policy, to exclude her from school and put her outside in the cold and stick her in front of a computer where they gave her access when on occasion to her classes. She was excluded from taking tests. She was excluded from participating in the educational process. She was denied an education outright. She actually was punished. This was the policy, was to shame her publicly and punish her for disagreeing with basically compelled participation in an act of pretend. Masks do not work. There's not a single scientific study out there right now that is credible showing that masks have a sufficient reduction on the rate of spread of the virus that causes COVID-19, sufficient to justify the harms that these children suffered. We're talking about kids now that have changes to the structures of their faces because of wearing masks. Dentists are talking about tooth rot. These kids are having noticeable physical changes to their appearances based on compelled masking over long periods of time. Imagine trying to be able to learn as a child from a teacher wearing a mask when you have an auditory disability. This is common. This happened all over the state of California. And these kids,
I can attest to
these
that.
kids suffered for 2 years for no reason. We know that kids are
crazy.
the least likely to be harmed from COVID-19. They're very early on, risk stratification data from the CDC showed that children basically were at a 0% chance of death. And they actually walked back the numbers of children confirmed to have died from COVID at one point, from 500 and something to even less. Because you know what? This thing doesn't harm children. And they used that as a justification either way. And they said they
And
had
so
to
now
follow
we're doing more harm.
and so they adopted these
Right,
policies.
we're doing harm with these
and basically, I went around and I educated people. I led protests. This is one of those instances where actually funding all of these lawsuits. So the Gavel Project is a 501c3 public charity. And we fundraise. That's what I do. And I basically hire attorneys in the states that I go to. We have cases all over the country now. We've gone from just doing COVID stuff. We're actually moving on as well to taking on child sex trafficking, especially when it involves state actors. That's a much more common thing than people realize. Children are trafficked through CPS on a widespread basis across this nation. And we're stepping in to stop this. There are children being trafficked by
Wow.
government actors because their parents don't agree with their using their child's preferred pronouns in this country.
It's nuts. Hey, so I have to go back a few
Yeah,
steps.
sorry, I get a little fired up when I talk about the law and what we're doing. Passionate person.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's good. And I could just see all these people and me in the audience putting our hands up like, oh, I have a question. So let's go back to what you're talking about as removing the mask is expressing your First Amendment right to protest.
Sure.
So a couple thoughts come to mind. I mean, I like to play devil's advocate, but right away I'm thinking basically, does that mean, now we have kids going to school who think that they're furry creatures and feel like they identify as a cat and they want to sit in class and meow and use a litter box. So is that them? Is it okay? Because that's their First Amendment right to express themselves in a manner that, is that why that is allowed to happen? I mean, it's happening up here in our little county and it blows my mind.
Yeah,
there's a litter box in the high school and kids can sit there and meow as long as they don't disrupt the class.
It's happening across the country. And it's actually happening in Orange County. I know this to be happening in Capistrano Unified School District, Dana Point High School. There are kids there that I've spoken to that talk about how some kids in their gym class get to sit on the sideline and lick their paws because they identify as furry. They don't participate in gym class. They don't get exercise despite the childhood obesity rate over the past 2 years spiking past 40%. They get to lick their paws that they don't have.
No,
they're playing pretend again.
Those cats should be whipped into shape. They should be jumping through hoops and climbing trees, and I would make those cats work extra
May gets
hard.
really upset when I say this, and I was a smaller kid. I wasn't really bullied because I had a really smart mouth and I made everyone else laugh. So then I'd always get the biggest kids to defend me because that's a double-edged sword. But, this was always my defense for bullying. There's some people that just really needed to get tuned up once in a while to realize that they're just being weird and asking for attention. And she's like, "Oh, you can't say that. You can't say that." I'm like, well, there's a little bit of a lot of the jungle to being raised and to part of the village, and this idea that look, I guess they have a First Amendment right to say that they're a furry, but I don't have to address them as a furry. That's the thing. The issue isn't whether kids want to be weird. There's always weird kids, and I'm not advocating bullying. But at the same time, you don't have to promote their mental illness. Like that's the crazy part. Like that's where the lunatics are running the asylum. This idea that you affirm every kind of identity. We had these two kids. A patient of mine told me that were dressing incredibly provocatively, way against the dress code of the school, but they identified as sex fairies. So because it was an identity, they had to affirm this. And I'm like, no, I don't need. You can call yourself a sex fairy, and you're you're transgressing the dress code. So we'll kick you out of school. Like that seems fair, right? I mean, hello, you can't go to school naked. Like there's limits to this.
You'd be surprised.
And
there are kids in California. I get reports from teachers that where kids that boys that identify as girls sit in classes with mini skirts so short that their testicles hang out in class, and their penises hang out in class. This is happening in public schools in our country. The line of decency is beyond gone. It's promoted by the schools and the school districts. There's a school in district in Orange County that has bags of clothes, boxes of clothes. This is a case that we have. The Gavel Project I can find this case and bring it on. I had the parents reach out to me. I'd love to take this type of case. They're allowing children to come to school and change into the opposite sex when they get to gender, when they get to school, gender. I want to be specific. This is a very important. They change their gender into their gender identity at school, and they're affirmed by the school socially. This is gender affirmation therapy being conducted with taxpayer dollars, which is a ideology based on nonsense that's shown to harm children. And that's really getting back to the point of the story of all of this. And I want to answer the constitutional question. I'll come back to that, May, in just a second. The Gavel Project basically exists to fight nonsense in society. That's what we do. We have a case selection committee that considers applications. People can apply for representation on our website. COVID-19 is nonsense. A lot of the stuff that was happening to our kids is a result of that is nonsense. We're here to fight that battle. We hire attorneys towards that end. Changing little boys into little girls. If you're doing that as a public institution, if you're doing that as like let's say, organization like Planned Parenthood, putting a clinic right next to high schools, they open clinics right next to high schools all over California, basically touching them. Like you could throw a stone from the clinic onto the high school campus, where they are the second largest provider of gender affirmation hormone therapy in the nation per their website. This is the Planned Parenthood of New York, the Western and Central Division's website. And we exist to make sure that these kids that are harmed by this nonsense, the interrelationship between government and the private sector, are given justice in some way. That's what we're trying to do. And we also fight corporations. If you're poisoning drinking water, that's the type of case that we want to take on. Like we exist to fight nonsense all over the country. We are actually branching out into child sex trafficking. That's something that I'm passionate about. I've been praying a lot about that lately. We're not a religious institution. I'm personally Christian, but we have a policy at the Gavel Project that we actually have a reason in science for whatever decision we make, because we're trying to win people over on the left. This isn't about some sort of ideological, dogmatic warfare that I'm waging. I am trying to solve societal problems using a public charity in the same way that they did during the civil rights movement. That's what this is. We are the ACLU of today.
I love it. I mean, because initially, you started down the path with the COVID narrative and what was happening to the kids, especially in California in the classroom. And I can't believe that girl was put outside to learn. Like, how's that even? What was the point of? I mean, good for her. I wouldn't even showed up. I would have said, if you're going to sit me outside, why am I even here?
Here's what gets me. Okay, this is a child that you are ostracizing in front of other children, using your authority, and like what kind of cold-hearted bitch or son of a bitch would do that to a child? Like the callousness of the teachers themselves, like that is so god awful. Like there's no one to stand in the gap and say, hey, look, we can send her home. We can do home learning or something, but you can't, like, this is a line too far. I mean, I guess Stanley Milgram was right, and most of us are just cowards that'll shock the shit out of somebody in another room until they're dead. I guess that's the way it is.
So we have to use preferred pronouns so we don't offend someone if they identify as a furry, but you can go ahead and make an example of someone that doesn't want to wear a mask and just abuse them like that.
I mean, that's child abuse.
It's so much worse. This case is this young girl was so brave. She did this on her own volition. I'm so sick of people accusing this young girl of doing something, and all the kids that I work with, the kids of doing something at the suggestion of their parents. These kids chose to do this. I have elementary school age children that are 9, 10, and 12 years old. These are little kids. These are 9, 10, 11, 12 years old in Orange County that were excluded, and I quote, as a form of punishment and stuck outside in an enclosed area, basically a courtyard in the school that resembles a cage because it's enclosed by bars. The kids actually called it a cage. They called it a jail. That's what they started calling it. The kids sat out there for 4 weeks. There's no shade. There's no shelter. They were exposed to the elements. They were sunburned. On one of the first days, it was 90 degrees outside. There was an excessive heat warning in the area. They were stuck out there. The parents weren't even called until the afternoon to notify them that their kids had been sitting outside all day.
What was that about? What they didn't have a mask.
They didn't want to wear masks. So their solution was to stick them outside in a cage for 4 weeks. They were told they couldn't leave. They were told they couldn't leave except to use the restroom because they were being punished. That's what the principal told these kids. If you go to my Instagram, everyone should go to my Instagram, at the Gavel Project on Instagram. Go back to my old videos. You'll see some crazy stuff of me speaking at school board meetings, educating folks on their rights. Actually, I had a whole bunch of things censored. I had an hour-long Instagram live yesterday get taken down at the end. Live feed cut. The feed's no longer available to go up because I'm teaching people about their constitutional and state rights under law, about how to disobey mandates in California still.
Man, how does a principal or a teacher get away with that? Like, I know it would happen in our neck of the woods.
Well,
some people
yeah,
would do.
I know what happened in our neck of the woods. It would be a pickup truck and a backhoe. Someone would just not show up to work for ever.
We're dealing with a mind virus here. We're dealing with the Gavel Project, as I tell my daughter when I go to California, and we're going out there. Actually, I'm being threatened in a lot of ways by individuals. My safety is not necessarily certain every time I go. I have 2 children that are both under 4 years old. One of them still under a year. And I tell her, Daddy fights the bad guys. That's what I do for work. And, I went out last week and I actually went to the school district, to Coronado, and I spoke at the school district. And I notified them that they had been sued. And I told them exactly why. I explained, you stuck a girl outside for 26 days in the cold. It was so cold outside, she had to wear a jacket that had batteries in it with an electric heating mechanism nearly every day. On one of the days this was early on, there was a planned lockdown drill. We all remember back the last couple of years how many school shootings have happened across the United States. How crazy the media coverage of this must be for children going to high schools, looking at these lockdowns and being like, all right, here's a lockdown drill. Prepare yourself. This is what happens if one of these terrible things happens. This was planned. This girl, the plan for this girl, because she didn't want to wear a mask, she was sitting outside. The vice principal came up to her and talked to her and told her to go to the 300 building and lock down in the bathroom. She did, and when she got in there, she realized that the bathroom doesn't have a lock on the door. They told her, this was the school's plan, this was the district's plan, to lock down for a lockdown drill in a bathroom that does not have a lock on the door. She felt like a fish in a barrel. Well, she was a fish in a barrel. That's what she felt like immediately. The anxiety. This young girl. I mean, I'm getting teared up right now.
This is insane. So these kids, obviously, she's, people would say, well, why don't her parents just pull her out of school and homes? I mean, she's obviously making these decisions, I think, on her own, correct, as an adult, to say, no, I'm going to, show up because I want to learn. The people who ask that question, in my opinion, are just cowards. Uh-huh. Right. And then what?
You're a coward if you're asking that question. These children, these elementary school children who were told they had to sit and watch their friends go to recess every day, the ones who had to sit there and were not allowed to go to lunch. They had to sit at desks all day. They were denied an education. They did that because they believed in something. They believe in liberty.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well,
and we have a friend like that actually up here in Oregon, and it's the same thing. Their kids had to sit outside at lunchtime and at recess. We're not allowed to participate in the cold in winter in Oregon, and I'm like, this is insane. Like, how that the adults who are the teachers and the principals that do this to these kids, that what do they think, it's a game? And I mean, they have no compassion.
They don't care.
They're
a
evil.
lot of them are interested. There's a lot
but-
of money involved here in the back end that we're finding. And actually, one of the reasons that I want to come on is to fundraise. We have filed our first lawsuit against Coronado. We named all of the school board trustees personally. We named all of the people involved because of what they did to this girl. And we're going after them, and they're not protected by sovereign immunity. They think they are in a lot of respects. They think they're safe. California law is not certain on that. This is a federal question, and it is very questionable whether they have protection. And in any event, they abused this girl, and we have a number of tort claims that we're filing, and we're going after them, and we are pursuing damages because what they did to these children in these school districts. We have probably 4 or 5 lawsuits like this that we're funding. My wife and I have made significant sacrifices to do this. I'm 29 years old. My wife is 30. I did this because I felt like I had to, because I knew what was going on. I didn't have any other option. I'm not out here doing this because I want to. It was necessary. There weren't enough folks doing it. And so, this is all about just helping kids get justice, because they really were harmed. I mean, back to the point of liberty, some things are just so fundamentally important and apparent to even children that they'll sacrifice to protect it. Like these kids recognize, when I speak to them and I go around and I talk to a lot of kids, I spend a lot of time traveling and go throughout California and actually leading protests all over. One of them worked, actually. You can see that on my Instagram back in February up in Natomas. We helped the kids go back to school without masks on by basically protesting like Rosa Parks. And I encourage folks to check that out and to go to my website. You can see resources there as well, the gavelproject.com. You can actually support us with a tax-deductible donation. Don't give your money to the federal government to fund the IRS to come after you. Give it to the Gavel Project so that we can go and fight back and assert ourselves. Please, we do need the resources to help these kids, but it's important to just basically put people on notice that there needs to be justice. And that's what we're after with all of this.
Hey, so going back to the issue to begin with, about the being able to go to school and do the protest and say, I'm taking my mask off. It's a sign of protest because I don't agree with it. And you're right. I mean, there was no studies on the mask preventing the spread, et cetera, et cetera. But at the time, it was the narrative. It was not just schools, but businesses, healthcare, companies, employers, airports, airplanes. They wouldn't let you fly without it. So if I decided to protest and remove my mask on the plane as of my First Amendment right, I would be kicked off the plane. So I guess I'm thinking, even to stand up at that time it would come with a consequence. I mean, you had to expect it in a way, even though it may not be right.
The airplane is a private business that you essentially, by buying a ticket, engage in a contract with them to do something. So they have the right to kick your ass off the airplane for any reason they want.
That's an interesting.
Really, I mean, not any reason, but largely.
Is
like
that? If
they're drunk and disruptive and screaming,
so
they can take you off the plane.
The airplane in the masking context was acting as an agent of the federal government. The reason that masking, as like basically the same argument that I'm making for the school context by removing a mask, is not the same in the federal context procedurally, because you're not dealing with the Civil Rights Act. You're not dealing with Title 42, Section 1983, which is applicable to states and state actors. In this context, you're suing basically an agent acting on behalf of the federal government, and therefore you actually have to overcome, if you want to use Title 42, Section 1983, this case called Bivens. And Bivens basically is the way procedurally that you get to sue the federal government under the Civil Rights Act, and it hasn't been yet extended to First Amendment cases. It extends, I believe, to the Fourth Amendment. So, like if the FBI, without due process or without just cause, kicks in your door and ruins your home by searching your house, if you were later to show that the warrant was constitutionally invalid because it didn't list with enough specificity what it was looking for, or basically what it was it wanted to seize and where it was located, then you have a claim for damages against that individual. But not so under the First Amendment. Under state law, though, where we're suing, you can do this. And, California and Virginia are the only two states, to my knowledge, that I've been able to find that actually say that school districts are arms of the state for purposes of sovereign immunity, meaning you can't sue them. Every other jurisdiction, as far as I can tell, goes the other way. So the great weight of the federal question is not on the side of California for this very shaky state court decision. And only attorneys are probably going to understand what I'm saying, so I'm going to transition here off of this point in a second. To this point, it's a very strong constitutional claim, and we have a bunch of them. So we're actually funding a bunch of these lawsuits on this issue across the state for the purpose of creating a little bit of splits between jurisdictions in California. We believe that we may get a good ruling somewhere and a disfavorable ruling elsewhere. And we'll appeal these issues up and try to take these cases to the Supreme Court of the United States, because we set these cases up, by leading these protests in this way. We actually shift the burden to the government for the first time in the COVID-19 era by basically convincing these kids to say, no, you sit in class. And this is actually what a lot of these kids did that I helped. They, not necessarily the elementary school kids, but the high school kids, would actually refuse to leave their classes. I sat outside of a high school at one point for 3 days and helped a kid sneak into class while the police were there.
Yes.
While the sheriffs were called every day. And we actually, because he was suspended by the school, allegedly, and he was refusing to leave. And he was so confident in his rights under California law. I'm actually getting ready to put together some content for folks. I'll put it up on Rumble because it's going to be taken down off Instagram, educating them on their civil rights and on their rights in California, how to disobey these mask mandates again in case they ever come back. Because you do have certain rights as students, and schools can only kick you out if they can show that you're somehow like a clear and present danger, for example. That's one of the education code statutes.
That was the big thing that used on just not even schools, but in lay people in general, was that people without masks were this big threat. It was like they were spreading, like the death plague to everybody. And that was the clear and present danger, an unmasked individual spraying virus all over the place, which is totally incorrect.
Yeah,
but people have bought into that.
That's entirely contradictory on their own policies, because that means you couldn't eat in school.
Yeah.
That means you couldn't go to a cafeteria, because then you're taking your mask off and then you're.
It was all nonsense, and we knew this from the beginning. I mean, even Anthony Fauci back in March of 2020 was emailing people saying that masks did not provide protection from this virus, because we knew that this virus, as an aerosolized virus in particulate, would not have a significant impact from masking as far as its spread goes. And so it would never made sense, because no other viruses that were similar had ever been shown to have been affected by masks. And even the studies, like the Bangladesh study that was touted as the key by the CDC for so long as being the best evidence of why we mask, it was recently shown to be junk science back in May. And the point is, the CDC has recently repeatedly come out. Even Michelle Lewinsky in the last week, the director, has been on record saying they messed up. They got it wrong. We know that you were on your last podcast talking about It was, what's her name? Dr. Burke. Dr. Burke was basically at the very beginning of the pandemic, per a statement to Congress in June. I don't know exactly recall the date. Stated they knew at the beginning of the pandemic, one, that the vaccine was based on natural immunity. That's what she said in testimony. She also stated in the same testimony later on that they knew at the time they were going through and recommending these vaccines to people, saying they were safe and effective very early on in the COVID-19 pandemic, that people with natural immunity could get the disease again. Connect the dots. The logical implication is clear. They knew at that time when they were saying this thing was safe and effective, that if you got vaccinated, you could still get COVID-19 again. And they were telling people at that time on a widespread basis, you can look it up. It's all over the place online. You will not spread COVID-19 if you get vaccinated. Remember, we were talking about herd immunity. That was the whole point of the vaccination campaign. And now we know that was all a lie. And
we did a podcast with Harvey Risch about herd immunity. And like Harvey, I have, him and Peter McCall, I have the most the most respect for of really any physicians and epidemiologists in this entire thing. And we were both fairly convinced that, you get enough people infected with the natural virus and you bump it up a little bit with the vaccination and we're done, wash our hands. It's the end of 2021. The pandemic's over. Have a nice life. Go back to normal. Well, clearly that didn't work. And now it appears that the vaccine with the newer variants is probably causing antibody-dependent enhancement. In other words, the people that are getting the sickest and the people that are the super spreaders are the vaccinated, not the unvaccinated, which makes actually intuitive sense if you understand the virology of this, where, you have immune imprinting, original antigenic sin, this concept of, once you're vaccinated, you're going to respond to every coronavirus and every variant with the old Delta or Alpha variant, and your immune system is kind of stuck. I mean, you got an automatic transmission, but you're stuck in second gear. It's great if you're going to go 25 miles an hour. It sucks on the highway, though.
Yeah, it's just, it was, they knew at the time that was the outcome of the technology that they were using too. It's just so abundantly clear that all of this was orchestrated in a way to hurt people. And, I believe that if people simply wake up to how often the United States government has lied about killing people. Like if this was a topic taught in our high schools, I put it on Twitter a while ago. I don't have a very big Twitter following because of how heavily censored I am online. I'm basically, I believe, shadow banned out the wazoo. People cannot see me. I'm not available. I literally got cut off yesterday after an hour live Instagram live with another freedom fighter.
You've reached Mecca status when you're cut off from social media. Well,
but that's the thing that's wild. Like, we get in these arguments, not arguments, but discussions, and they're usually good-natured with some of our, Canadian friends and family. And really the only argument, like I've read, honest to God, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 hours and given myself at least a bachelor's degree in virology through this. I know way more about this than I ever did before. And so, how do vaccines work? What viruses do they work for? Blah, 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 blah. So I'll sit down with somebody and I'll say, and I'll rattle off studies and statistics and how stuff works and basic virology. And the only answer I get back is, but then how come nobody else is saying this? Or how come all of the powers that be disagree with you? And I'm like, because giant
how much time
and
do you have? Like, that's always the question I have for the person. Like, I can explain it, but how much time do you have?
Right, but that's what I go through. I go, okay, so the Tuskegee experiment, let's bring that one out. That was in the last 100 years.
That was in Los Angeles within the last 30 years. People, or 40 years. Right. People need to wake up. Like, they were experimenting on people in LA just a few decades ago, and it's like the whole area has completely forgotten about it. And
no, but
it's amazing.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point. And it happens. It's like I sit there and I go, you don't read history.
Okay,
every single government that gets to a certain size and a certain amount of power tries to push the control envelope. It's like
People don't read history.
They don't teach it
Well,
anymore.
it won't happen in Canada.
I watched somebody, doing the rounds again, interviewing. It wasn't even high school kids, early 20-somethings, about who's Stalin. Do you know who Stalin is? Do you know who Mao is? No, but do you know the Kardashians? And they rattle them all off. I mean, they're not learning this in high school, and people, if you set them up, they don't want to learn it when they're.
But Mao had a giant ass.
I don't know anything about his butt.
We're teaching them how to dress up and play dress up and act and play your favorite furry character in school. But are you learning anything about it?
Yeah. So back to the furries. They're not teaching. They're not teaching anything about Rosa Parks anymore in schools. The teachers are just excluding certain topics they want to. And they're teaching these kids that basically the most important thing about them that's possible is to be a particular type of victim status. And through this new phrase that people need to catch on to called social emotional learning, it is broken down as SEL. This is just a new term for Marxism. It is all about dividing children and highlighting categories like, for example, your gender or your skin color or your nationality or any of these particular types of ideals or really superficial things that are true about you, these conditions about yourself. And they say these are the most important things. Is to be someone who is a victim. They basically say society is divided into groups of oppressors and groups of oppressed. And these particular types of individuals, like let's say someone who's a minority transgender individual, is immediately granted a particular type of status. They are rewarded by the teachers. They are actually hailed as being some sort of brave or taking some sort of brave leap that should be recognized and applauded by their peers. They actually use social pressure in such a way as to affirm the ideals that they believe in. And they're trying to destroy society. That's what this is all about. And that's what we're fighting at the Gavel Project, is basically they're trying to make it such that kids today are confused about everything. They cannot function. They're in a constant state of emergency. They're told that boys can be girls and girls can be boys. And they're told to play pretend that they have power over people if they categorize themselves as certain groups. And then those other people disagree with them. It's because they're racist or there's some sort of thing wrong with them based on some ridiculous epithet that they come up with. But that's not the case. Simply talk with me. Let me have a conversation with you. And I can educate you on a lot of things if you're willing to sit down and speak. But we have to have a dialogue. You can't just shut me down and call me a name. But I mean, the point is to the Constitution here. One of the things, like let's say being a furry, is a choice of an individual to partake in some certain ideology or activity, almost like a religion, let's say. That's the individual's choice. Forcing individuals to wear masks from a government edict is very different. That's basically you are nationalizing the bodily autonomy of students as a conditioned precedent of getting an education. That's disgusting. You're both physicians. You both recognize that oxygen is a basic human need just to function. These kids are becoming high. Can you educate me on the term hypotoxic? Is that right? Where they're
hypoxic.
Yeah, hypoxic. These kids are becoming hypoxic within minutes of putting these masks on their face, and they're not. The masks aren't put in place by science. There was no reasoning behind them. There were examples of, let's say, Placentia Yorba Linda, where the school board president unilaterally adopted a mesh mask policy, basically saying for no scientific reason that if you can shine a flashlight through a certain type of mask, then that one's not available. And so the kids there were kicked out of class based on their political affiliations, is what it seemed like. There was anarchy across California.
I mean,
how does that
crazy?
happen?
Clearly it's so obvious that you don't have to be a physician or a healthcare person to
happen?
know that a mask is causing more harm to kids than benefit.
Of course, but
from
how does
all those things we talked.
The most disturbing thing you just said is Yorba Linda? Like anyone that understands Southern California understands that Orange County is a conservative enclave. I have a buddy that lives, one suburb away from Yorba Linda. Yorba Linda, believe it or not, the birthplace of Richard Milhouse Nixon and John Force, the greatest drag racer in the history of mankind. And it is unbelievably conservative. He's like, in the group of friends he has, he's like, I don't know a single person that voted for Biden. I cannot tell you a single person. So how in the hell, in the most conservative enclave in California, is this kind of crap going on? I would think that parents would be losing their minds.
People are terrified of offending other people. The political correctness in California, the level of compliance with political correctness and not wanting to offend someone for having a differing viewpoint that is seen as tolerance, basically. The social pressure to comply is extreme. The clients that we have are literally being harassed by the community. We have a case in Capistrano where a little girl was forced to apologize. This is what we're alleging. The little girl was forced to apologize in front of her friends on the playground for making a painting that said all lives matter, any life matters. Forced to apologize for making a painting and giving it to a friend. It was a perfectly innocent painting. There were 4 blobs underneath the words. The blobs were representations of people. They were different colors. They were holding hands. The little girl didn't understand why the school was putting in front of her this ideology every day when she logged onto her computer of Black Lives Matter. And she didn't understand why her Japanese friends didn't matter, why her brown friends didn't matter, why all lives didn't matter as a 7-year-old girl and was forced to. This is public shaming. This is about shaming individuals into compliance with accepting false lies about reality. That is what wokeism is. It is Marxism. When you live in 1984, one of the main precepts of that book is basically you are forced to accept untruths about reality. And you are forced to accept lies and play pretend, even though you know the truth. We all know the truth. We know they're lying. They know they're lying, and they continue to lie, right? That's what this is all about. Yeah. And so these kids need to stand up. And the ones that did, the ones that actually I helped, and the ones that took a stand, did so because they believed that if they didn't do it now, they're going to have to do it later, but they're going to have to do so with guns in their hands. And the parents understand that too. That's the thing that I got immediately, and why I quit my job is because I don't want to have to pick up a gun. Our motto at the Gavel Project is better a gavel than a gun. I'm about peaceful civil disobedience. I'm about peaceful action to avoid conflict, physical conflict, because when you start threatening people's children, that's the only other option. People are going to start getting physically violent, and I don't want that to happen. That's why I'm doing what I'm doing. And so we're at that point now, where these kids said, look, I know my teachers aren't going to hit me. So I'm just going to sit in my class, and I'm going to have my attorney help explain to me what my rights are. So, hey, bud, you can sit there because the California Constitution guarantees you the right to an in-person education. It's right there. Here's the code citation. I read it. And that's sort of what we do. The Constitution will justify what these kids did. That's the mechanism. That's how we prevent this from happening again in the future.
Well, I get so frosted because I'm like, where are the real mature adults in all of this who are responsible? I mean, right down to the, adults who are worried about offending other people. I'm like, if someone's offended, that's on them. Too bad. Like, we got to stop the way of thinking in our society of, oh, we can't offend somebody. I'm like, get over it. That's on them. And then what happens is all of this, these adults, and I don't know how we're selecting teachers, or if it's just that they're allowed, these people with these Marxist left-wing agendas are allowed to push. And ultimately what's happening, like you're standing up for, is the kids, our futures, generations of society are being affected. And the way to really impact change is to try to make a change at the school levels so that, we raise healthy kids who are allowed to grow up into healthy individuals as adults.
But can you imagine? And I had this argument with somebody, which was awesome because I destroyed him and it made me really happy. And he grew up in a Christian family and then he chucked his faith. Okay, that's his choice. He can do whatever he wants. And I said, look, I said the masks are bullshit. They don't work, and it's even what Fauci said. He goes, they're mostly a symbol. It's the symbol of compliance. I said, so you're asking me by mandating this to, to in a coercive manner wear a symbol I don't believe in. And he goes, yeah, but it doesn't really cost you anything. I said, well, it actually does. I mean, there's infections you can get from the mask and all this. He goes, well, yes, but it's making everyone else that's really worried about this comfortable. And I said, well, my job isn't to reinforce somebody's irrational fear. I said, let's do this, okay? Let's do this. Ash Wednesday's coming up. I'm going to coerce you to put an ashen cross on your forehead because I believe incorrectly that that's going to keep some sort of bad juju away from possessing your soul. And I'm scared shitless if I don't see the cross on your forehead that the juju is going to come from you and attack me. Do you think that I, for the sake of somebody's irrational belief, you should put a cross on your forehead? Well, no, that's a religious symbol. It's different. I said, no, it's exactly the same.
It's a political button.
It's exactly the same.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine if you made kids wear gigantic crosses like they were a cardinal at the Vatican and then indoctrinated them with, you're going to go to hell if you don't wear the mask. And not only that, we're going to make you sit outside in 40 degrees. I mean, you'd go to jail.
Yeah. By the way, kid, you can't take your test. You're going to go to get locked down in this bathroom without a lock on it. You aren't going to be able to participate in your group project in directing. This is actually one of the things that they did to this girl. They took her out of her directing class and they made her direct herself. How do you direct yourself? She was in an acting class, and she was told basically she can't be in a group project anymore. Like, this is the type of ridiculous.
These people are idiots.
This is the type of ridiculous punishment that they're inflicting on children, and it really is punishment. And so the thing is, the Constitution and the Civil Rights Act provide mechanisms for individuals to rectify injustices, and that's what I was going around telling folks at the time. Like, look, even if they don't, let's say, let you go back to class without a mask on, you can preserve your right to sue them for violating your civil rights. And you should do so, because that's how we as a nation show and actually establish what's okay and what's not okay in society. And these school districts got tens of millions of dollars in the last 2-3 years from the federal government in COVID relief funding. They got tens of millions of dollars in what were called ESSER grants. The first one from the American Rescue Plan. By the way, people need to wake up. The conservative and Republican Party need to wake up. I'm not a conservative. I'm not a Republican. I want to make sure I'm being clear here. I'm just for a second going to take off my Gavel Project hat and go to my Ryan Heath personal citizen hat and talk about the Libertarian Party, and just recognize that President Trump signed the biggest spending deal or bill in American history. $4 trillion in 2020. He also authorized the Operation Warp Speed and granted immunity to the pharmaceutical complex. What are we doing? The left, the right, it's all the same. I like Trump. I think that he did a lot of good things, but he's not the best solution for us right now. Can we please just go to make a recognition that perhaps a third party, the Libertarian Party, is the correct move for the president of the United States, and Dave Smith is the person to do it. All right, back to the Gavel Project, and I'm putting back on my lawyer/CEO hat.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm wondering.
Well, the libertarians are great though, because it's guns and weed. Like, you can't really beat that.
Yeah, it's a good combination.
That's
a
great
liberty, freedom, guns, weed. All of that is great. Let's just leave everyone alone to their own devices and not harm anybody for once.
Actually, Trump Jr. posted this meme, and it said, "I believe a gay married couple should be able to guard their weed farm with guns."
Yeah.
What's wrong with that?
That's perfect.
There's nothing wrong with that. So I want to know, in California, well, anywhere, but can these kids, their families, their kids, sue the teachers that did this to them as a civil suit?
That's what we're doing.
Do they have to go after the school district?
Yeah,
okay.
We're suing the teachers, the ones that were particularly abusive individually in their personal capacities.
Yeah.
One of the issues that they think that they're protected under basically sovereign immunity in a lot of instances. There's this doctrine called sovereign immunity that's enshrined in the Constitution. It's I believe the 11th Amendment, if I'm remembering off the top of my head correctly. I call myself a constitutional attorney, and sometimes I get confused on these ones, but let's go with that one for now. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong.
So many laws.
Anyway, the sovereign immunity
laws.
basically was an amendment to the Bill of Rights, basically granting states what's called sovereign immunity from suit. So basically, states now, if you want to sue a state under law, you have to do so with their consent. You can't just sue the governor of California for anything. They have to be basically consent to that type of lawsuit because he is, let's say, an arm of the state. That's the idea. It allows states to function. At least this is the argument of those that were proponents of this, in such a way that they are independent and can act without fear of repercussion, except for in particular circumstances. And so, for example, the bill, the Civil Rights Act, that was passed in the in the turn of the middle of the century, I believe 1950s, 1960s timeframe, was basically a grant from the federal legislature overriding that act to individual citizens to sue state actors in particular types of circumstances. So, for example, First Amendment violations is one of the things that you can sue certain types of state actors through. And there've been this basically long case of there are many cases of precedent from different courts that lead it to the point where students are protected in acts of free speech. This is the constitutional precedent, for example. If they remove their mask or if they engage in an action of expressive conduct, so long as that action is one not disruptive to the educational experience. This is a case called Tinker v. Des Moines for anyone who's interested in looking it up. If the protest is not disruptive, it's protected. And if it doesn't violate the rights of other students, it's protected. Those are the two basically caveats for exercising one's First Amendment rights in the school context. And so there basically, that's how the individual, I'm sorry, I kind of lost track of where we were at right before I went on a tangent into the First Amendment.
Suing individuals.
Why we can't sue Gavin Newsom?
The individual teachers.
Yeah. So basically,
because
the sovereign immunity issue is interesting because the teachers in California think they have sovereign immunity, and that's because there was this case back in the 1990s that was a state case. It was a state court decision in California called Kirchman. And the question of sovereign immunity, because we're talking about the Constitution, the federal Constitution is a federal question, meaning the final question on that issue is left to the federal courts, not state courts. So this is a question for, let's say, the Supreme Court, which is what we believe we're going to aim for if we have to get a favorable ruling here.
So how does, I mean, just to literally to dumb it down for me, because legalese is not my thing, and I know some other of our listeners will be like, so the teachers think that they are exempt from being having a suit against them because they're functioning under the jurisdiction of the school district, and as long as
Correct.
it's a mandate by the school district to wear a mask, they're free from any kind of like repercussions.
That's their argument.
As they enforce that.
That's going to be the argument here in the case. And so one of the things that they're arguing there basically is they're state actors, and therefore they are protected by sovereign immunity for constitutional violations. That's going to be the argument.
So enforcing a mask is one thing, but to put someone outside in the heat or the cold for hours at a time.
Sure, and there are many claims we're making based on those issues too.
Come on, that's just common sense.
No, right,
it's
but
like how just because you are trying to enforce a mask, I mean, you don't get to torture people.
Exactly. And
like, how is that not criminal?
Yeah.
How is that not a
It
criminal
is. We filed criminal complaints with different shit. No one's done anything.
Say that about you could say that about a doctor.
The attorneys, the district attorneys don't do anything. We filed criminal complaints. If parents were sticking their children out in the 90-degree heat for 6 hours without any shade, they'd have CPS called and the kids would get taken away.
Exactly.
I had my dog in a 65-degree car for 40 seconds, and some tweaker walked by and saw it and wanted to, start a fight. And I said, you have no idea how hot it is, and you have no idea where I've been. You have no idea how I care for my dog.
Yeah.
I mean, people break windows out of running cars with air conditioning because a dog's in there.
So I want to get back to the sovereign immunity case, because this is actually related to that recent bill in California where doctors are going to have to sue for basically disagreeing with a compelled orthodoxy. It's the same issue here. You have a state agency, which is the board, the California State Board. They, based on in my view, terrible precedent, have been granted sovereign immunity as a state arm of the state of California. And so they basically are going to have the same argument. Any physician that wants to assert their First Amendment rights are being violated. And by the way, they should reach out to me. They should contact inquiries@thegavelproject.com. This is one of those cases I'd love to take. And by the way, anyone who wants to really, like, if you're sick of the status quo and you want to see some serious disruption and actual movement on protecting children from nonsense in society, $100,000 to the Gavel Project would be go a long ways. That's not that much money to make a big difference. We have cases all over the country, and we're taking on the issues that no one else wants to take on. And sometimes you got to sue people because it's the right thing to do, even if you're going to lose. And that's what we recognize. We're going to bring novel claims on very difficult issues. And you know what? I'm the right person to do it. I was a pupil of Justice Alito of the United States Supreme Court. I was in his class in law school as a third-year student on constitutional interpretation. I know what I'm talking about when it comes to these issues. And so back to the Kirchman case, basically for school districts, this is similar to the doctor's issue, because you're going to have to establish that the state medical board is not an arm of the state based on precedent related to doctors. So this is a very similar process that's going to happen. I'll do it there as well. I'll do the research. I'm happy to do it. But for Kirchman, for school districts, basically was a state case back in the early 90s that said that school districts in California are immune from suit because they're arms of the state under sovereign immunity. They are protected, and the individuals like the school board trustees, for example, would be protected as well, because as opposed to if you wanted to sue, let's say under the same Civil Rights Act, a local governing agency like a local municipality, the state county board of San Diego. If the state county board of San Diego as a local governing agency passed a law like a mask mandate that violated your civil rights and you sued them for damages under Title 42, Section 1983, the individuals responsible, you would be able to recover because they're a local municipality. They're not protected by state sovereign immunity. That's a local actor violating your government rights, not a state actor. And so we're arguing basically that the school districts, and this would be the same argument for the medical board, they're not a state actor. They're individuals acting on pursuant to their own judgment and beliefs to pass ordinances that violate my rights as an individual, whether it be something saying to wear a mask, or whether it be something saying to not deviate from a particular type of medical procedure under certain circumstances.
So that was a case back. So someone tried that case and they interpreted the law as the school boards were state actors, and that gets passed as that. Like, I guess it blows my mind, and I understand the law. So that's one case. So how does it make precedent, like if other states aren't doing that, and how come someone else can't come along and go, no, that's wrong. You're not the school board isn't
good questions
under that sovereign rule. Overturn that. I mean,
so let's explain some background information here so we have the context. So on one hand, you have, let's say, a federal question, which is about the Civil Rights Act and liability under sovereign immunity. That's a federal question that is left to the final question, at least on that issue, to federal jurisdictions like the Supreme Court of the United States, for example. We're not talking about a state tort claim, on the other hand, where, let's say, if you're trying to sue someone in California under the common law for intentional infliction of emotional distress, that type of lawsuit, that type of legal issue is governed by state law. The Supreme Court of the United States has no authority to decide on the Constitution, or on basically the legality, on the legality of that state law issue. at all. That's not their say. It's the state court's final say. And so for this question, this was a state court that made this decision. And in this decision, when you're an attorney and you're writing, one of the rules as an attorney writing legal arguments in official court filings is that you have to provide citations for cases or precedents that support your case. And you have to provide citations for precedents that disagree with your case. Okay. And that's one of the things you have to do on certain issues. So in Kirchman, in footnote 3, this is very important. The number of jurisdictions listed that disagreed with this federal question being decided by the state court was like half a page. It was there was one other jurisdiction cited that actually does this as well, and it's Virginia. And that's because there's a case from Ohio, and Kirchman actually talks about this, I believe. There's a case from Ohio. This is a federal case that went up to the Supreme Court even earlier than Kirchman, I believe in the 80s, where the Supreme Court on an issue similar to suing a school district, basically under certain circumstances, there was a plaintiff suing a school district. The Supreme Court stated in one sentence, school districts are not immune as parts of the state for sovereign immunity purposes. They explicitly stated that. And later on in California, a state court in California, where, by the way, for fish can be bees under the EPA, apparently, they decided to basically overrule the Supreme Court. And that decision has been basically blindly followed by every subsequent case without any real challenge to the issue until now. And so we're pushing that issue, and I'm happy to do the same research and push the same issue for physicians. We need support for these kids. And you know what? The Gavel Project, we're a public charity. We are limited really only by resources. We contract attorneys in states that we go to. We have cases on all sorts of important issues, from parental rights relative to schools. I want to get Planned Parenthoods away from California schools. They're all over the place, like basically connected to these institutions, and they don't need to be anywhere near them. The ideologies being taught to our children that are brainwashing them, that's what the Gavel Project exists to fight. And we have our first lawsuit filed. It was against Coronado last week. I'm happy to speak with anyone who wants to support us, any big donors out there. But any gift helps.
Perfect.
Really. So please, if you have anything to give, we're not going anywhere. We've got a lot of work to do.
And what's exciting, I think, for our listeners, because we have a lot of them in Oregon, but elsewhere, but that you aren't just limited to California, that this can apply to anybody in any state.
Yeah, and I want to fight the bad guys, like the people in high levels in our government who seem, one of the craziest things I've heard recently. I want to talk to you guys about the new vaccine here in a minute. But the craziest things that I've heard here recently was the fact that Ghislaine Maxwell was convicted of child sex trafficking to nobody, apparently. How is it that like how who because no one was charged with the people, like who did she traffic the children to? Where
Santa.
Yeah, like that's the thing. It's
Easter
like
Bunny.
We know that
the Easter Bunny is incredibly horny. Like it's
we have the flight logs. We know who went to Pedophile Island. Why is no one fighting those people?
No,
like I that's what I want to do. So if you want to see justice on wide scale, if you want to see the criminal enterprises of the teachers unions be taken down, you want to see all of these, and like I'm not against teachers. I want to help all the ones that keep reaching out to me every day begging me to help them with their mask and vaccine and ridiculous policies. I want to, but I just want to stop nonsense in society, and that's what we do. So please support the Gavel Project, share our content. I was share my statement to the Coronado Unified School District Board. That was a fun speech to them.
Yeah, we'll put that stuff in the show notes too.
And I want everyone to go back and listen to you.
Yes.
So it was episode 56 back in January, and then 65 in March. That one on 65 is when you talked about what was happening in California and how you were helping.
Yeah, thank you.
Almost going to remember his name, but
young man, T.
Protest them. Yeah. That's right. And so go back and listen to those episodes too, and then it'll bring you up to speed on what Brian's been doing.
And I want to, we're going to get to the vaccine here in 1 second, but I really want to reiterate in my doctor brain, not because I'm not a lawyer. I just play one on TV. The whole concept of this legal protection for the schools, because they're an arm of the state. Okay, just think of that. Okay, so you have school boards and teachers running amok because they think they can't get sued.
Yeah, that's basically the issue.
For violating your constitutional rights. Like that's horrible. It's schools, for God's sake. These are indoctrination camps by definition. That's why you send a kid for school, to indoctrinate them with certain knowledge. That's the point. That's the first place you should be able to sue. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, hello. It's just like, you know what keeps some doctors honest? Malpractice attorneys. Okay? It's not a bad thing. If I went back, and our doctor listeners are going to crap their pants, but that's okay. After what I've seen in COVID, if I went back and became a lawyer, I would become a plaintiff attorney and sue shitty doctors because I've been so unbelievably let down and disappointed by my own profession.
Yeah.
And so, I would be, and where I would get the greatest pleasure would be taking down giant health systems. I would be the brainworm from the Wrath of Khan in administrators.
That's on the radar for us too. We want those cases. We want the resources to be able to take on those cases. And I'm a talented person. I've overcome quite a lot in my life. You went back to the beginning of this phone call. Obviously had some issues with pain pills when I was a young man, and had a lot to overcome. I paid for school out of pocket. I worked 3 jobs at one point, full time. To get through undergrad, and went to community college for 3 years and did undergrad, at ASU in state. Made a lot of sacrifices, and now I'm being punished by the federal government because they're giving, all the money that I paid to take care of my college, while all the sacrifices I made to skip football games and not party and actually work hard to get through, that's worth nothing now. But to the point, we're in a world where individuals are benefiting and profiting from inflicting harm upon other people, and that's what we exist to fight. So the vaccine stuff was one of the things. I just think it's ridiculous how we're at that point now where, as you mentioned in your last podcast, this new vaccine, I believe it's the BA.4-5 subvariant vaccine, was targeting a disease called Omicron that it doesn't even really impact anyone on any substantial degree as far as dangerousness goes. And it was passed after.
Well, it does. It hospitalizes the previously vaccinated. That's what we are seeing, at least
selection bias.
That's what we're actually seeing in the cohorts of data released by the state agencies. The province of British Columbia was consistently releasing information on hospitalizations and showing that, all these people in the hospital are unvaccinated, until about a month and a half, 2 months ago. It all they had like every week they'd post this, and now all of a sudden it was like 60%, 70%, 80% of the hospitalizations were in vaccinated people. So they just stopped reporting it.
Yeah,
because they said people are going to misinterpret.
That was back in the spring, but
amazing.
Pretty much all hospitalizations were in vaccinated and boosted patients.
Yeah, the boosters really. And now we have the booster tested on 8 mice. That's
that's an important point that I think everyone needs to really focus on here, that you mentioned in the last podcast. They tested this not on any humans before giving it emergency use authorization. They tested it on 8 mice and approved it. Think about how low the standard is for EUA. And we mandated EUA authorized drugs just a short time ago on everyone, basically, in the population, as a contingent precedent to participate in society. You have to have a vaccine card some places.
I don't know if you heard it, but if our listeners that have heard and go back to that episode we did with Sasha Latapova, who has unpacked
She's
the
amazing.
Pfizer and the FOIA documents released and looked at all what they did in this so-called studies to get the EUA, it's disgusting. I mean, you wouldn't put your kid in a car if you knew what kind of studies went on, let alone what they did with the vaccine and that people are injecting into them, their kids and their pregnant bodies.
The other thing that's fascinating, and I just saw another article about this last night, was it appears that there was not significant end user studies. In other words, they didn't quality control test the vials. And I think somebody tried to get an independent something or other for just random lots of Pfizer and Moderna, and they couldn't get them because they didn't want them to. And I don't remember all the details. I kind of skimmed through the article, but essentially they didn't want anyone looking at the vials and actually, counting how much had intact mRNA, because a lot of them didn't. Like, so it's exactly what Sasha said. There's vaccine lots that had 2,000 VAERS reports, and there was vaccine lots that had like 2. So clearly the manufacturing was screwed. And I was actually delighted to read that because we had absolutely nothing, like no sore arm, nothing. Like we got injected with saline, and I think that's because we got injected with saline.
Wow.
So I'm like, yes.
Or denatured vaccine, that had no quality control, was thawed out in the hot Penske truck driving across the country. Who knows?
It was thawed out in the cleavage of a nurse.
Well, we could sit here and catch up for hours. I'm super excited that you came back and updated us on what you're doing, and that the Gavel Project is,
thank you,
gearing up, and that people need to get in touch with you, get in touch with the Gavel Project, whether you have a case that you're interested in, not just in California, anywhere.
Or you have a case of money.
Have a case
or
of money.
Journalists, too. I want to speak with journalists. I have a lot of stories that I need to have help with. I'm running into very dubious actors, and it's getting pretty scary, actually, how bad the relationships are between these institutions and what frankly appear to be mob or mafia-like institutions in a lot of respects. These are public schools that are engaged with very dark money, and I'm covering it. And just to have people who are interested in those types of issues reach out to me would be very helpful.
Awesome. All right, we will help spread the news. We will link your info on our show notes again, and post some links on our social media before we're not big enough to be taken down, so we're okay for now.
That's our goal. Our goal is to be so big we collapse under the weight of our popularity.
This one might get taken down if you post it. We'll find out. Maybe.
Nah.
We'll figure it out.
Let's go for it. Pushing it under the radar.
Thank you both again.
So good to talk to you again, Ryan. Thanks for all that you do. You're a true patriot and a blessing to, the kids and
to America.
Oh, stop.
I'm honored to do what I'm doing. Thank you.
Well, that was maddening, I would say, aggravating to hear some of this stuff. But encouraging when you kind of hear the next generation that's passionate and willing to kind of, take this stuff on. And it isn't just about COVID. It's about freedom and exclusion and all this craziness and taking that on. And we're glad that there's somebody like Ryan out there who's willing to put teams together to do what they can legally. And so if you'd like to, absolutely, we will link this in the show notes. Check out the Gavel Project, make a donation, and you can be a part of his fight.
Absolutely. And I just think it was amazing to hear from him and his passion for helping kids, families, that he has no connection with, but is now has a connection because of how he's gotten involved and really cares about these kids. And so, I'm just going to make another appeal to if you live in California, if you've got any kids involved in some craziness at school, or if you really want to be involved by being an angel donor to support the project, please follow the links that we'll put in the show notes. Thegavelproject.com. It's easy to find if you just type it in. But I think it's amazing what he's doing, the movement that he started, not just in California, but pretty much they can connect you with any state where there's grievances, and so much more to come. So I'm excited to see someone young, so much passion, and this is hopefully just the beginning of people trying to take back the craziness. So I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if you're on the side of truth, ultimately the truth wins out. Whether or not you survive the battle is the hard part. I've been thinking about that a little bit myself. The truth has a way to win out, but, I think back historically to, what is one of the kind of core emotions as far as all these mandates, and it's really been hubris. It's been pride. And it's the same kind of thing that, you were like, oh, well, when have government officials, thought too much of themselves and bad things happened? It's like, well, every time. I mean, World War I, they thought was going to be maybe 3 months. It ended up being 4 years.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of nonsense. And so it's us that have to take the battle to them. And I mean,
I think that with the way things are going, like we started talking with him, the social changes in school, the agenda that the school districts are trying to push, take over as far as teaching our children social, as they call them, norms that some of us don't think are norms. I mean, I don't think there's any place for that in school. Talk about people getting mad when there's religion at school. I think it's going to. I think it's
a new religion. That's exactly the point.
So I think that this is going to go on for a long time. Not just the COVID issue, but all the other stuff with the gender and the, as we talked in the show, just all the stuff that they're letting kids do and supporting in schools that really affects the future of our kids. Because when you're allowed to wear your furry costume and disrupt a class and request a litter box, I don't know. That's not what school's for. Reading, writing, arithmetic, anyone?
Well, I like my litter box at home, actually. I prefer it.
I knew you. I was waiting for that. I dropped the bait, the litter box bait.
Yes, I
Don't be flinging no kitty, what is it?
Well,
I forgot the name of the stuff now that I punted the cat outside. I can't even remember the name of it.
I prefer clumping.
Oh, you like the clumping
I like
formula?
the clumping formula better.
I prefer the stuff with the gain extra scent for triple cats. Drown out all that urine smell. You like clumping. I'll remember that. I'm thinking low dust formula. Anyway. We digress, and we hope we've left you with something to laugh about at the end of this heavy show. So thanks for being here. Check out our podcast episodes with Brian earlier this year, and check out our website. Please share with a friend, and we'll see you next time.
It's no secret that medicine is a bit, uptight. That's why Tim and I created BS Free MD, to mix things up a little and have fun in the process. Besides, we are having these exact same discussions all the time, so we thought we might as well invite everyone to the party. If you really like us, you can get plenty more, and maybe see one of Tim's cool tattoos on our Instagram or Facebook pages at BS Free MD. See you next time.
While we try to keep BS Free MD as raw and real as possible, we can't be held responsible for any medical decisions or discussions had as a result of what you've heard on the show. We know, bummer. But the truth is, we really do care about your questions. So feel free to reach out to us by email at doc@bsfreemd.com.